Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, a place for men to be men and talk about masculinity and men's issues. I'm your host, Brian Kral, and today I have another really special video for you. This is the case against love. Is love real? Most people would say yes, but if so, then what is love? Can you define it? Probably not. Most people can't. They instead say they know it when they feel it. But this is a fallacy, because feelings can be quite facetious. In fact, the whole concept of love is erroneous, which is why it's something without any one real, definitive definition. There are so many different ways of talking about love from so many different points of view that people rarely agree about what it is or is not. And that is because love is not really a real thing. At best, it is an abstract philosophical concept. At worst, it is a destructive weapon which ruins the lives of most men and always has. The best thing that you can do is to stop believing in and pursuing it. But of course, most men don't want to do this because we are programmed to desire love. We love the idea of love. So allow me to properly make a case against love using logic and science so that I might be able to convince at least some of you good men out there to change your paradigm and help you to save yourself from this thing we call love, which is a very negative and destructive thing for us men that is simply been masked as a positive and beautiful thing. And so in order to make my case against love, I've laid it out into 4 different parts, each with a number of different points, so that if anyone disagrees and wishes to refute or debate any part or point made, they can do so by referencing it directly. So let's start with part 1, of course. This is 4 points made by Socrates in a dialect with Agathon as documented in Plato's Symposium. Point 1, love does not exist by itself. Love is something that occurs for something else. Point 2, this love for something is a desire for something that one lacks, which one finds good and beautiful and thus desirable. Love is in that sense a form of desire, a desire of something good which one lacks. Which leads to point 3, that love is not inherently beautiful and good in and of itself. For if it was, it would not be seeking beauty or goodness in others. You are seeking that which you are absent of. Which leads us to conclude in point number 4, that therein love is absent any inherent beauty and goodness in and of itself. Love is itself neither beautiful nor good. This is a great philosophical standpoint from one of the world's most renowned philosophers, which has stood the test of time, as it was written in about 375 BC. That's just about 2,400 years ago, and yet the texts of Plato are still taught in universities today. So that is the first part of my case against love. But now that you've heard the 4 points of the case made by Socrates, let's move on to part 2, which are my own theories against love, of which there are a dozen points I'd like to make. Number 1, love is immaterial. It is not a physically real thing, as with real estate, which one can display and prove to exist in the same sense you can with material goods or property, like this cigar. You know, I can give you this cigar, you can take it, and know that you have it. One can, of course, display the object that they love, right? But often this is a person, and people are not objects or property and do not like to be treated as such. And when being objectified, will more often than not claim that this treatment is not love. Interesting, right? Then number 2, if love cannot exist on its own and requires an object to be loved for it to exist, it is not a real thing in and of itself on its own, okay? It has no independent existence on its own, right? It can only exist by being attached to something or someone else, you know, like a demon, like a demon who possesses things. And point 3, those who love can do harm to the object that they love. As in, for instance, being a meat lover. If you were to tell a person you loved them while cannibalizing them, they'd surely disagree that that is true love. or loving someone who you behave abusively towards. Again, these people usually disagree that this is real love. So in many cases, these cases at least, love is a contradiction, and things that are contradictory are not real, right? Because the parts of them that contradict each other cancel each other out, just like in a math equation. Number 4, love is just a feeling, and feelings are not genuinely real, as we all often arrive at the conclusion of, especially in the case of love, as within the following situations, which leads me to point 5. If someone can fall in love and then out of love, often quickly, then love is too fleeting and transient to be even thought of as real. And it is almost always the case that love, people feel, does not last very long. It's nowhere near permanent. It's usually not a lifelong thing, right? And so it is quite fleeting and transient, and real things are not so fleeting and transient. And number 6, if someone can love something or someone and then realize later that they do not actually love that person, but just loved the idea of them or loved who they thought they were and not who they actually were, that the love they felt was not real, that goes to show that love itself is an illusion that cannot be trusted to be real, generally speaking. And number 7, people love because they equate it with goodness, which they desire, as we talked about in part 1, but it ends up being bad for them and causing them hurt more often than not. So then the problem is that love is not usually what it is supposed to be. As we say, love is supposed to be a lot of, good things, which it doesn't end up being. And things that are not usually what they are supposed to be are called falsehoods or lies. Right? And number 8, love does not have one set definition. Everyone seems to define it differently. That is, if they can define it at all. It is not a definitive thing, you see. And when someone claims to be in love with someone else and someone wants to debate it and tell them that, it seems like they really aren't, they'll use some sort of language like, oh, well, that's not real or true love. And so if people can argue about what is or is not real or true love, as you are probably doing in your mind now while listening to this video, saying that, well, in those cases, it just wasn't true love, right? But you see, even in this case, the same problem still exists, that these things have no real set definition, thus are just still abstract concepts at best. They are not what we would call real things. Things which cannot be absolutely defined are not really real. Okay, you have to either be able to see it, touch it, prove it, define it, do something like that in order to say that it's real. But we can't. We can, however, prove that it's not. So let's continue to do that with number 9. Love is an illusion that is easy to fake in order to manipulate the emotions of others to get them to fulfill your needs. If there was a real thing called love, it would not be so easily falsifiable. Okay, so for instance, if you have a fruit bowl with fruit in it made of plastic, and you have me over to your house and we're sitting at your dining room and you try to prank me to get me to take a bite of one, I'm not going to do it because I'm going to be able to tell that it is fake fruit. And anyone who is not severely mentally handicapped would know upon looking at the fruit, or at the very least touching it, that it is not real and they won't take a bite. All right, this is because everyone knows what real fruit looks and feels like. And it is not easily falsifiable. The same, however, is not so for love, which makes it easy to mistake and thus easy to fake. You see, things that are easy to fake are so because there's no standardized reality of the thing. And people often fake love in order to do harmful things to others, like take as much money and assets from them as possible, bringing them into financial ruin. And this is the opposite of what love is supposed to be. Yet, how can someone mistake love for its opposite? Because there is no true standardized reality of what love really is. You couldn't do that with something that has a real existence, like fruit, for instance. And point 10, love ends in sadness almost 100% of the time. Even when you're doing the breaking up of someone else, or breaking someone else's heart, it generally will make you sad too. Therein, one could actually say that love equals sadness, which it is not supposed to be. Again, that is the opposite of what it is supposed to be, and is yet another contradiction. People do not want to fall in love because they want to feel sad but good, yet the end result is almost always them feeling the opposite of what they were supposed to. So again, love is not what it is supposed to be because it is not really real. And 11, some people never experience love. Many people even spend their entire lives looking for it and never finding it. And something that is real can be experienced by anyone. As with real estate, anyone can stand on it. They will all agree that the land or the estate they are standing on is in fact there and real. Anyone can eat a piece of fruit, right? But the same is not true for love. Love is at best a subjective experience, which, as I said, has no standardized reality for how people experience it, and thus is insanely varied. But also, not everyone gets to experience it at all. But the point is that being so subjective, it is not an objective reality. Quite the opposite. And thus, it is not objectively real. And finally, number 12, the ideas that people have about love come from stories such as fairy tales, basically a mythos or mythology that we were conditioned with, just like in religion. So love is really something that people believe in, like with religious or spiritual beliefs, or fantasies, or delusions, without any real scientific basis or, any evidence or proof. And yet when we talk about fairy tales, we don't talk about them as if they are real, right? Because we know that they are not. And yet love gets spoken about in that same fairy tale type of fashion, but people believe in it, even though it sounds so unbelievable and incredible when we talk about it. Something that I did my last video on, all of the different ways that we talk about love and romance in this sort of fairy tale-esque manner, with all of these different levels of romantic fairy tale that you can experience. And they all really just sound like fantasies or delusions, and yet people believe in them like it is a religion. And if you haven't seen my last video, make sure that you do. I'll put the link to it below, because it is really important to sort of reflect upon the ways that we talk about love and ask ourselves the question, does this really sound reasonable and rational and logical and realistic? Because any mature, intelligent, psychologically developed adult who isn't mentally challenged is going to say, no, that sounds more like delusional thinking. And the point is that believing in something without any scientific basis that's really completely unfounded is irrational thinking. It does not make the thing real. It can propel you into delusional thinking the more that you do it, and thus is not healthy for you. So that is my own personal philosophical case against love as both a philosopher and a social scientist. And speaking of science, let us now move from philosophical thinking to more scientific thinking and see what scientific thinking has to say about science and love, in part 3 of which there are 3 points to be made. Number 1, in the field of science, things must be proven or disproven using what is called the scientific method. Things that cannot be proven or disproven are not scientific, but philosophical. And love cannot be proven or disproven. Therein, it is a philosophical or theoretical thing at best. But yet we already know from parts 1 and 2 that when we address the idea of love philosophically, it is actually easily disproven using philosophical logic, as we have already done quite extensively. And then moving on to number 2, science has proven that love is felt due to pair bonding hormones that the brain secretes, such as oxytocin and vasopressin, to cause us to feel attachment to someone that, nature or our body has deemed us fit to reproduce with. But love is not supposed to be just attraction and attachment for pair bonding and reproduction purposes. So while that is what is scientifically provable, it doesn't fit with any of the common definitions or ways you hear people talking about love in the social narratives. Therein, all of the ways that people have had of defining love and all of the definitions they have placed upon it have gotten disproven by science. And then number 3, love is a feeling often felt due to social utility. Therein, someone feels it for someone else who fulfills certain needs of theirs. Not necessarily for someone based upon who they are, but what they do for you, which is especially the case when it comes to how women love men. And then when they stop fulfilling those needs, these feelings that she has called love will wane. Therein, the love is not real and is just a feeling of having your needs fulfilled, or the potential of need fulfillment caused by pair bonding hormones again. All right, so that is the scientific case against love. But let's say that some of you out there continue to deny or don't even care about any of that logic. Let's say you still want to believe in love. Well, here are some more reasons not to, and why, even if love did really exist, it is not a good thing that we should want and try to experience, especially if you are a man. So here is my 4th and final part on the case against love, made up of 6 different points. Number 1, love is just an emotional high that is produced by drug-like chemicals in the brain, such as dopamine, oxytocin, and other hormones. It is not actually mentally healthy. It causes us an addiction to these feelings, which is what gets us pair bonded with the person. And with every high, there must be a come down. And that's why love causes emotional peaks and then valleys. So it's not all good. In fact, it is largely bad feelings. And while we've romanticized the idea of love so much, it is basically no different than seeking out cocaine and getting addicted to it and then romanticizing that as some sort of love story. Because these hormones in our brain are actual drugs. I mean, if you were to be given a dopamine pill by a doctor, you'd call it a drug. And yet when your brain secretes it because of an experience that you are having organically, which is causing its production and secretion and thus getting you high, you don't think of it the same way. Instead, we romanticize it instead of thinking of it as the extremely unhealthy and destructive thing that it is, which is, just a drug addiction like any other, like cocaine. Which leads me to point 2, which is that love causes emotional instability. And of course, pain, like in number 3, love causes painful emotional experiences and emotional suffering, such as depression and anxiety and heartbreak and such. And number 4, love clouds your judgment and causes you to act irrationally and impair your decision making, especially long-term decision making. And number 5, love causes us men to sacrifice ourselves for our woman and do things that are not in our best interest. And lastly, 6, love causes us to enter a domestic situation that actually lowers our quality of life greatly. And of course, women have a very negative financial impact on men, and in the end, bankrupt many or most of us. So those are the final 6 points against love that would make it an ill-advised goal and decision to go after, even if you do still believe that it is real, which it is basically, from my perspective as a social scientist and philosopher, beneficially disproven here. All right, so that is my case against love. Again, if you disagree, feel free to debate me by referencing the parts and points that you wish to contest, and we will discuss them. But otherwise, I hope that this video has enlightened you to the fact that love is simply not a logical thing to believe in. It's like believing in Santa Claus just because it makes you feel good to do so, even though Santa keeps disappointing you by not showing up anymore as an adult. So, obviously, the only logical thing to do is to remain single and avoid allowing your brain to trick you into thinking that you are falling in love with someone, which is just nature's way of trying to pair bond you with them for the evolution of the species. But like with all aspects of our social conditioning and cultural programming, what is good for society is often not actually good for the individual. And that is exactly why we are sold this romantic fairy tale of love, just like I talked about in the last video. Again, make sure you've watched that. The link is there below. But otherwise, that concludes this talk. Thank you for listening. Be sure to share your own thoughts and opinions by commenting below. And if you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button and share these messages with everyone by sharing the video on social media and talking about these things as well. And lastly, check out the links in the description below for other resources for your masculine personal development and living the life you want to as an independent man. Stay tuned for the next video coming out soon, which will be on how women make men weak and stupid. And make sure you subscribe so you'll be notified when that is. Until then, take care of yourselves, men, because no woman out there is going to.